there's been a lot of working together across, political jurisdictional lines to say, hey, it's all our fight. So that has been a pleasant surprise.
You're doing very well at answering a lot of the questions that I have without me asking them. So that's always really great.
I hope so. I'm trying to make your job easy here. And if I go on too long, because how people are with PhDs, they love the sound of their own voices. So you can redirect if you need.
No, this is all very helpful. So I am intrigued to see how do you think that your neighbors, other people in the community generally feel about the pipeline coming through?
Well, I can tell you very specifically. This is where it does get interesting, and judging from the description of your research, I think my observations may at least give you some signposts. You grew up in the county. There are not a lot of PhDs walking around there. There was not a particularly when I was growing up there wasn't much respect for formal education. I think that's still largely the case among big chunks of the population. And if you look at the history of the people who organized Preserve in particular, also I think to a degree in Preserve, you got up there and it was going through some of the subdivisions that were heavily populated by profit. You had a highly educated ground force up there of people who were ready to organize, whereas in county, that is not the case. I mentioned Natasha and her husband. Mark's an engineer. I'm not quite sure what her educational background is, but you grew up in the county is not a local name. They're not from there. Mike grew up in the county. The farm had just moved there a few years ago from Florida. The majority of people who were activists early were transplants to the county. They did not have, and now I'm going to jump back specifically to the way you phrased this question. I have talked to many of my neighbors on the road. Some of them have opposed it. Others have. It was practically in their yards before it was rerouted, and they were like, well, I'm worried about my well. Don't know what it's going to do to us. Well, they said they'd fix it. Guess there's nothing we can do. I heard, well, there's nothing I can do about it from many of the neighbors right there on our road, which is a dead end and it's a mile and 2/10. And pretty much everybody on that road is affected one way or another. And some of them whose it's practically in their yard have never made a peep. And others who I have talked to directly would give you and this is a characterization, the rural fatalism. It's like, well, there's nothing I can do. And I believe that was overall the reaction of many of the people who have lived there all their lives. In fact, a family member of mine, a second cousin, and if you went to church, you know a lot of my relatives because my mother's father grew up in Church of the Brethren.
Okay.
He was and so, in fact, the home place is right there up the road from the church. It's jointly owned by Wendell, and Wendell owns part of it, and Charles owns the other part. They are my second cousins. They are the sons of Galen, sons of Uncle D. Daniel, who was my grandfather's brother. And I have other second cousins whose land is being directly affected, all out of that family. And one of the second cousins who's not being directly affected and does not live there anymore has been interested and contacted me actually through Charles, connecting me with Mary Jo, who's my age, and we went together. And she remarked to me in an email exchange, I'm really proud of your mother and impressed. She's the only one of her generation who's really stood up against this thing and fought. she went to the first public meeting that the Board of Supervisors had on, I can tell you the date, October 21st, 2014, because it was the night before she turned 90. And the following summer, and there are pictures of this. I can send you pictures, and you'll find a record in the Times. Mother and I got featured rather prominently in some articles because she was out there in 90-degree weather when she was 90 years old holding a protest sign in front of the county building. She was the exception. There was no one else out there remotely her age but her, and certainly no one local. All the other people were from away who had moved there. They were either going to start some sort of farm, or they were retiring there and for the bucolic views and all that, and said, wait a minute, my retirement paradise is being desecrated by a 42-inch pipeline. Those are the people who were mostly activists, and the vast majority of the people who had lived there all their lives did not resist much. Now, some of my cousins, second cousins, have become more active. They have hired attorneys. They're fighting it. But it took them a while to get up to speed.
Do you think that there's any particular thing that kind of made them, oh, this is actually something that I should be working on versus, like you said, that rural fatalism? Well, it is what it is.
I think for one thing, in certain instances, I can tell you, I encouraged them, my mother encouraged them, my sister encouraged them. It's not like we have been in close touch over the years, especially with my sister and I moving away. But, especially once the pipeline fight started, we started reconnecting, and I encouraged them. I said, you need to hire a lawyer, you need to do this. And eventually some of them did, because it was going to have all of them on farms. Some of them are still farming. We don't farm, but we rent ours out to farmers. And so we have farm tenants. And people, especially in my family, are very sensitive to, we farmed this for generations. Well, we've been here a long time. We don't want this torn all to pieces and ruined for farming. If we wanted that, we would have developed it years ago and gotten the heck out.
Yeah.
So I think that has been a strong motivator for those who did come to it later. And to be fair, because of their educational background and because of just the general passivity that comes from living in county, and if you quote me on that, you better anonymize it pretty darn good. But it is a characteristic of that place particularly, I think more so the county or any of the surrounding counties, or maybe not, but it is a characteristic of you have a relatively uneducated populace who basically does not interact with the larger world to a great degree, does not wish to, and is somewhat fearful and apprehensive of it, and has, generations of experience of being oppressed by people with more education and money than they have, and they just sort of go with it.
Yeah, I think that is not an unfair characterization at all. I would dare to agree with that.
And to be fair, it is not peculiar to that part of the country. It's typical of rural populations, at least some rural populations. I think it's always been particularly bad in county. One of the changes that we have seen is the Board of Supervisors throughout my life has been a bunch of old, uneducated white guys who met pretty much in secret. Even when the meetings were open, they didn't do anything, and they ran it the way they wanted to, and nobody said boo to them. And for the first time in my memory, I think in anyone's, they are starting to face serious blowback from voters. There are people, that was one of the things we did early on. We started going to the open sessions, the board meeting, even though they have them on Tuesday afternoons when everybody's at work. And we believe that's a deliberate strategy so they don't have to face voters.